Hello, I'm Donald Norcross. Today I'm joined by the Curator of American Slavery at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Mary Elliott has over 20 years of experience in researching and presenting African American history and culture. While we as a nation have progressed, there's still widespread racial inequities and injustice. The death of George Floyd in Minneapolis is a sad reminder of the injustices African Americans still face today. Important we continue to learn and educate ourselves about the past. As we begin to celebrate Juneteenth, Mary Elliott is here to educate us on its importance and its meaning. I'd like to welcome Curator Mary Elliott. Thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this generous invitation. I always welcome the opportunity to talk about our nation's history.
Yeah. So let's start out with a very basic question. Friday, June 19th is Juneteenth. Can you explain what exactly is Juneteenth? What is that?
Juneteenth, let me start with the name. So Juneteenth is a combination of words. It's June 19th, and it's relevant to the date June 19th, 1865. Why is that important? Because on June 19th, 1865, Union Major General Gordon Granger, along with 2,000 Union Army soldiers, entered Galveston, Texas, and informed the enslaved African American community that they were now free. In fact, they had already been free technically because the Emancipation Proclamation passed in 1863 on January 1st. Well, the Emancipation Proclamation freed enslaved African Americans in the Confederate States, but those Confederate states weren't willing to give up their human property, so it took a civil war to actually enforce that Emancipation Proclamation and ensure people gained their freedom. The folks in Texas didn't gain their freedom truly until 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. And again, that's that date, June 19th, 1865, that pivotal moment that Major General Granger read those important words, were a turning point, you can imagine. And so it was a moment of celebration.
I bet. We were just talking with my staff yesterday about this conversation we're going to have today. And I said, I'm trying to think back. I'm the late 70s in elementary, high school. I don't remember being taught it, but I said, how about some of the younger staffers? I said, were you ever taught this in school? No. In fact, our one staffer was saying his grandmom shared with him the story. Is this being taught in schools?
No, it's not necessarily being taught in schools. I guess it depends on what school district you're in and what curriculum holds this as a priority. We learn about slavery, but we learn about it from a certain perspective. And it's very important to understand the larger story of the African American experience that tells us the story of American history. And so I say that because it's very important for us to understand about resilience, resistance, survival. And what's also equally important is here's Juneteenth. Now, we know we have the July 4th celebration, and we reflect on independence. But then you get to Juneteenth, and this allows us to reflect collectively, not just African Americans, all Americans, to reflect collectively about what it means to be free, how it's applied, and what is this notion of a universal, an inclusive application of freedom in this nation, a more inclusive application.
So you talked about the time when the troops made it to Texas from when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. So what's the key difference for those who aren't studying history real strongly between the Emancipation Proclamation and what happened Juneteenth and that time period in between? So there's a disconnect for some people trying to understand that.
Well, this is an important question about the significance of Juneteenth and how it informs us about how freedom came to be in this nation for seemingly all Americans. So you have the Emancipation Proclamation that freed enslaved African Americans held in Confederate states, those states that were rebelling, so to speak. And so
We call them traders.
Yes, so then you have states, the border states. What are the border states? The border states are those states that maintain slavery but did not secede from the Union. And so you have the Emancipation Proclamation. It goes into effect. The Civil War takes place, and it's enforced throughout these Confederate states that slavery will end. But it took the 13th Amendment, right, which goes into effect in December of 1865. The 13th Amendment to end slavery in the nation. And even that came with a caveat. That came with some stipulations.
So 2 years practically after they were free, it's hard to believe that somehow the word didn't creep down there. Were there rumor mills going around?
No, there's the understanding is that the word did make it there, but that enslavers didn't want to share that news. They were trying to hold on to their human property. There's also the notion that they were trying to eke out another crop season. And then there's the issue of people who were moving to Texas to expand their enterprise in hopes that slavery would continue and to protect their human property, knowing that the war was taking place and that the Emancipation Proclamation had passed, and Texas was the farthest west.
So that's the reason why they were last on the list?
Yeah.
Wow.
I want to point something out to you because this is very important. The language of the text that was written by Major General Gordon Granger on June 19, 1865, I always recommend to people, it's good to learn the scholarship, read from the people who are finding these primary source materials, interpreting them, and making them accessible to the public, but go to the primary source yourself. And so the text, which is General Order Number 3, speaks volumes to where we are right now. Think about this. The language of the text says, and this is what's often upheld, the people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain at their present homes. That would be a slave cabin. And work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts because they were, and that's where we get the contraband camps, and they will not be supported in idleness, either there or elsewhere. So the language that we talk about is all slaves are free. That applied to those 250,000 plus enslaved African Americans in Texas and others who were in the other Confederate states. But understand the rest of the language reinforces, in some sense, know your place. Advised to remain at their present homes. Think about the word choices we make. Were they enslaved? Were they indentured servants? Were they servants? Present homes, a slave cabin.
Wow.
And your idleness will not be supported.
Set the stage. Where did he physically give this speech, and who was his audience? Was it a town square? Was it slaves? Was it freemen, or what were considered at that time?
It was a mix of people. Include in there free people of color as well. You have white citizens as well, and it's at the Ashton Villa building, and he announces this General Order Number 3 on the terrace overlooking this crowd. And there's great moments of joy, but understand this, the people who were there, they get that immediate information. It still has to travel throughout the rest of the state.
So some people knew it because they got newspapers, they could read, they were educated, and for others, it was just had to be mind-boggling to hear those words.
Yes.
Wow. So,
and imagine a moment of doubt in some minds, like, is this real?
So 47 states, District of Columbia had this as a holiday. We call it a ceremonial holiday. I actually will be sponsoring along with Sheila Jackson Lee, who will be the prime sponsor of the Juneteenth as a federal holiday.
Wow.
When we talk about this, and that's one of the reasons why we're so glad you came on to explain some of this, many people don't know about Juneteenth. Do you think the idea of making it a federal holiday is something that is a good idea, especially given the times we're in?
I do think I personally think it's a good idea. And I say that
Why?
personally as an African American. I say that personally as an American. You know, it's one and the same. The operative word is being American. I think that it's always good to have these times to pause and reflect on our history, to look at what we've come through, what we've been able to overcome, and are we fully living up to our ideals?
Given what we're going through today, starting with George Floyd's murder to the one 2 days ago, what do you think the idea of this holiday means in light of what we're going through and talking about in police reforms? Can we reflect on some of the issues from back then and lay that before us as a guide for police reforms?
Well, I think what's extremely important about this moment and thinking about this holiday, I read to you the language of this text. And one of the things that comes to mind is the mindset of society, the perspective of how African Americans are viewed in society. And so to have the language to say that you're free now and you have absolute equality, but we're not going to accept any idleness.
Yeah.
This approach of you're free, but I still see you as burdensome, perhaps lazy, beneath me, and you need to stay in your place. And so the question is, how does that play out as this nation continued to evolve? And still is.
Yeah.
And so we have the foundations in our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, but we still have to continually revisit these foundational documents to say, are we fulfilling these things that we base our nation on? And I think that's important, how it plays out, not only in the exigent circumstances of today to save people's lives that have been, you know, marginalized and killed on the streets and going through brutality, police brutality, but then also in our day-to-day lives. Imagine we're in a pandemic right now and we don't have to see each other face to face in a meeting, except on Zoom. But imagine how important it's going to be when we get back to the office, because there's this thing called death by 1,000 cuts. And African Americans and others who on a daily basis face implicit bias, they face marginalization, they face blatant racism, and they're just trying to get an advance in their job, get an education, make sure their children are treated fairly. And these are the things that outside of the police, as individuals, we need to think about how we look at each other.
Wow. So you spoke about the pandemic we're in and just incredible times that we as Americans are going through. For those of us who've been to the museum, it's incredible. I had the honor of going through it the first time with John Lewis by my side.
Wow.
Or let me say, I was by his side. And to go through and you start down the bottom, you work your way up. And then to see my colleague, John there, who are in the pictures, are in the different documents you had there, was remarkable. And I encourage anybody who has not been there, please go there. It's just a reflection of history of who we were, who we are, and who we need to be. But COVID is in the middle here. So what's the museum doing to still touch people in a way when they physically can't come there?
So we're using a digital platform to reach our audiences. And what's really great about the digital platform is that it reaches audiences beyond the physical. So even if you can't come to the museum, whether you were able to come before or just not, if you couldn't afford to get a ticket to come to DC or what have you, it extends our footprint so that people can have access in new ways. In terms of where we are right now with COVID, we are actually getting ready to launch a program that will enable our audiences to share their stories. Because one thing that's very important is to tell this American story, and we say through the African American lens. But I want to tell you that we started collecting objects related to the recent protests down at Lafayette Square. And so I say this is told through the African American lens, but there was a gentleman who's, I believe he's American Indian, fair skin in tone, and I'm saying that for a reason. He was taking photographs at the site, and I asked him what brought him down to Lafayette Square. And he said, well, I lost my job in COVID, but then with COVID, but then I got my job back. But then the protests happened, and I decided I needed to be a part of it. And I was told I would lose my job if I went to the protest. And he said, and I did, and I've been here for 4 days, and I don't regret it. And I said, well, we want to capture your story. And he looked down at his skin and he rubbed his arm. He said, my story? And I said, yes, because at the end of the day, Congressman Norcross, we all own this history. This is all of our stories. And regardless of what political affiliation, race, gender, nationality, age, if you're tall, short, fat, or skinny, this is all of our stories, right? And we all care about this nation to make it the best that it can be.
So the idea of educating that next generation, hearing it from the grandmother, as Michael Paulson and my staff did, meant something very personal to him. We weren't shared that way. How do we get this as part of the curriculum so that at age 62, I'm not getting such an education that I should have gotten when I was in grammar or high school?
We have a quote from John Hope Franklin, the renowned scholar, where he said, you have to tell the unvarnished truth. One of the things I always think about in my family, we always say, make it plain. I don't think that this information has to be sugar-coated or told in a way that it shouldn't be told in a way that people are, cautious about how you talk about it. It's American history. And so the way to teach that and think about, okay, so we have Independence Day, here's Juneteenth. How do both of these holidays make us think about what it is to be free?
And how it changed the future of our country.
Exactly. And so you look at the change over time of this nation and what do these moments mean? And one thing that's very important is, while all these folks are giving holidays, recognizing it in private sector with Nike and others, Amazon, and then the different states, what's extremely important is that folks don't look at this as the Black people's holiday. It's not just a holiday for African Americans. This is a day for people to reflect. It's a day that culturally, it's family gatherings, but the history shows it was a day of speeches, sermons, and reflection. It's commemoration and celebration. Very important.
We have Lawnside, which is one of my 52 wonderful towns that has a great history. We're looking forward to additional conversations with you. Maybe we'll even get you to come up here one day and review our little bit of history in Camden County. But Juneteenth, we continue to fight for freedom, equality. It is about education. It's about respect and understanding also. Becoming a better people, a better nation. And I want to thank you for sharing your perspectives on Juneteenth, and we appreciate it very much. And to encourage our audience, go online for the African American Museum of the Smithsonian, but also, when you get a chance, it is an incredible place. I encourage you all to see it. Mary, thank you again. Take care.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Juneteenth is a reminder that we must continue to fight for freedom and equality. More now than ever, we need to educate ourselves, respect and understanding our neighbors, and to grow, become better people and a stronger nation. Supporting Juneteenth celebrations creates new bonds and understanding. There are many local Juneteenth celebrations happening in South Jersey. Our office is open. The team is here to help. Please reach out to my office at 856-427-7000 or go to our website, norcross.house.gov. Thank you.